What happened at your work that made you go, screw this, I don't get paid enough? I was a young professional at the time, and one of the older partners had me drive his wife to her hairdresser and wait for her to be done. I then had to take her grocery shopping, carry the groceries in, and put them away for her. When she told me to vacuum her carpet before I left, I said no. By the time I got back to the office, my partner was red in the face and said that if his wife tells me to do something, it is like he was telling me to do something. I told him to write me up, which he did, and had HR present it to me that I was insubordinate for not vacuuming his wife's carpet. I ended up leaving a few weeks later after a lateral move to a more progressive firm. I have that write-up framed in my office as it is so ridiculous. I know, right? Like, if he wanted a maid, he should have budgeted for one, not try to sneak it into the young professional job description. Sheesh. Story 2. I worked at a preschool where my supervisor, who happened to be a good friend of two of the aides, had them spy on me. I decided to turn in my resignation. Before I did, she called me into a meeting with the HR director. While I held the letter behind my back, they said I was being laid off. After the meeting, I ran the letter through the paper shredder and I was able to collect my unemployment insurance. I felt I had gotten even. I did go back to teaching, but I found a job that I loved in a public school. I went from the worst job I ever had to my favorite. Story 3. I was working at a car dealership for a while, about a decade. I was the go-to in my department. Our job was to take all the incoming leads from our website and incoming chats and incoming calls and answer the customers' questions. I got paid the state minimum wage, which at the time was $12 an hour. If I convinced them to come in for a test drive and talk numbers and options, I got paid $20 commission. If they bought a car from our sales team, I got an additional $20 commission. It was all right work, easy in a physical sense, and I'm pretty good at talking to folks. Back in 2018, we had the busiest year the place ever had. We were far and away the busiest dealer for the region. It was a year I broke 6 figures for income and I wasn't allowed any overtime pay. Just absolutely bananas. Like, how were we all rewarded for our efforts? All commissions were reduced to zero and we were left to flounder at the state minimum wage. We were told this when the owner of the dealership called the entire sales, management, and internet teams together and delivered a speech about how every single week he viewed our earned paychecks as us stealing money from him. So I stopped working. I went in, sat down, did the bare minimum, and spent my days looking for a new job while at my old job. Greedy old schmuck. Story 4. I had money stolen from my tip jar by a new employee multiple times. My boss said to wait for him to do it again with proof. I said screw that and quit. That same employee was fired 2 weeks later after having stolen from other employees, including the boss himself. The whole store shut down a few weeks later because other employees quit en masse. My new job pays twice as much with half the stress. If you're reading this, Austin, thanks for being a piece of crap. Turns out it made my life better. Story 5. When I was in college, I worked a retail job. I always just got stuck on the closing shift. The store had a policy that you needed 2 departments worth of people there with the manager when they locked up the store. My department had the most individual items, lots of small components, so repriced and restocks always took forever. So we were basically always stuck there until the very end, generally about 3 hours after our scheduled clock off, because there's always one other department that for one reason or another had a very long closing each day. One day we decided we would work our butts off getting everything ready so we can leave on time for once. We get to 15 minutes before the normal clock out time, and our supervisor goes and gets the manager to do a walkthrough and okay us to leave. He says there's something wrong. When we ask him what it is, he refuses to tell us. We proceed to spend the next hour trying to find anything out of place and find nothing. Finally, once we are the last department not finished, he tells us, turns out literally one frickin' item on one of the end caps wasn't straight. It was slightly crooked. I literally screamed in his face, chucked my badge at him, and walked out the emergency exit. Story 6. When I was just about to graduate college, a woman walked into my workplace and started demanding I do something that violated corporate policy. I told her I'd have to get my manager to authorize anything like that, and she started screaming at me about how dare I question her while telling me I'm an idiot who will never amount to anything. I paged my boss, and when he arrived, I told him I was turning in my 2 weeks' notice because I wasn't getting paid enough to deal with a dumb friggin' witch like this one. I liked my boss, but the expression on both his face and that of the dumb frickin' witch were amazing. Story 7. In the 90s, I worked at a fast food restaurant with a playground. Some kid pooped in the tornado slide, and my manager asked me to clean it out. Got a hose and sprayer and started spraying out the slide from the top. There was a bit that was being stubborn, so I tried to get the sprayer closer to hose it out, and that's when I slipped and slid through the mess that was left. I walked up to my manager, soaking wet and covered in crap, and informed her I was going home to take a shower and she could clock me out at the end of my shift. Since I was in uniform, clearly covered in mess, near the kitchen and customers were watching, she told me to go home and she would handle it. Luckily, I had a plastic bag and a change of clothes in my car, so I didn't have to ruin my car seats on the way home. Story 8. I would drive an hour through rush hour traffic to get to work. Some days I'd arrive 10, 15 minutes early, and some days I'd arrive at the site right on time. Arriving on time, in my opinion, meant badged into the building, and in the gowning area, they required us to wear a clean room suit inside the production area. Being in that gowning area on time was not on time, per my manager's opinion. I told him that I could always go into the production area in my regular clothes, and he insisted that it was not permitted. Thus, I pointed out that donning the gown or schmucking up was a requirement and that it should be when my time on the clock begins. He told me that I could either leave my house 30 minutes early, meaning I would get to work 30 to 45 minutes early, which he said he would not pay me for, or I could go find a job closer to my house. I looked him straight in his eyes and said, "You're absolutely right," and handed him my badge. I actually helped his department crank out great numbers. The lead in the department told me that she was grateful for me because she always had to work that area, and I was helping free her up to do actual lead work. I'm sure she was angry when she found out I was driven out for what was essentially a disagreement of a minute. I just wish more workers would stand up and recognize their value. We have more power than we give ourselves credit for, but we vote away all of our leverage to employers that don't really give a damn. Story 9. Retail jobs, multiple of them. One that really put me over the edge. A guy paid for something on layaway. Once you pay it off, you get the item, but it's not on site and is shipped in. Out of my control as an associate, out of the store manager's control too. We did not have the item yet. It was impossible to get it that minute. He wanted it. This guy berated me for 30 plus minutes like it was my fault. The store manager was almost zero help. He just let me get yelled at over and over. I finally got the situation sorted and the prick left without his item. Afterwards, I nearly cried in the parking lot sitting on my full motorcycle gear beside my bike. A friend I hadn't seen in years happened to see me and say hi. Normally, I would have talked to him forever, but I was absolutely destroyed by that customer. I basically just said hey, and that was pretty much the extent of it. That was basically the moment I decided to go back to school, got an internship, and worked myself into technology. Retail is fine 95% of the time, but it's the 5% that eats your soul alive. I hope that guy chokes on a rock. Story 10. Worked a remote pharmacy position that was good vibes and relaxed until the old boss quit and Queen Witch started. She turned everything on its head and started surveillance on everyone 24/7. I have an epileptic cat, and one day she had a seizure, so I stepped away, kept her comfortable for a second until it stopped and was back. The boss called me into a meeting with her boss and HR about an hour later and showed me statistics where I had been idle for 2 minutes. Talking down to me the whole time like I'd done something atrocious. I just hung up the call and never came back. Screw that place and the micromanagement. Story 11. This is illegal, but I'm going to tell it. My boss didn't pay the electricity for his establishment and asked me to put up a devil, a common term for an illegal direct tap into the power lines. It is extremely illegal and very dangerous. I got scared because I thought he was joking, but he told me, "Do it or I'll fire you. I don't need a piece of crap." I said, "Okay." I discreetly grabbed my things, went up the roof, then jumped to the other roof of our competing neighbors and asked permission to leave through their employee door. And I left without saying anything. Ha! You never saw me again. Curious fact, he found someone who did it, caused a small fire, and received a large fine. Story 12. Right after getting my master's, I was working at a community intensive outpatient clinic. The counselors did really want to help, but we were constantly understaffed, underfunded, and undervalued by insurance agencies. Our clients were all very high need. We worked with a persistent and serious mental illness, forensics, and most of our clients were on Medicaid and very low SES, socioeconomic status. We often dealt with homelessness, food insecurity, and the traumas associated with these things. These clinics are super common, but since they don't pay very well, they often attract people just out of school, which is a disservice since those clients need a tremendous amount of care and expertise. Us younger counselors did what we could, but we're the least experienced clinicians and will ever be, and the stress causes a lot of people to quit the field entirely. I mostly held my own, but I remember one day returning to my office after a group session and then seeing like 15 new emails all from another clinic. I shared a first name with a nurse in the other clinic, so I expected that I was forwarded these by mistake. For due diligence, I went through them anyway. It turns out there was a new client that reported an active dangerous ideation in their counselor. This means that this client was actively threatening to harm themselves and the therapist they were working with. The email chain was the counselor freaking out and trying to figure out how to get the client out of the office. The client wouldn't wait for a medical cab, so they put them into an Uber, which is both very dangerous and super unprofessional. Now, I thought they would be sending them to the hospital, but if that were the case, why not just call an ambulance? As I continued down the email chain, I realized that they put the patient in a cab to send to my building to talk to me. And for the record, I was a standard clinician, about a year of experience. Notably, I am not frickin' stab-proof. Just as I got to the last email, I got a phone call from our medical secretary. You_connect FTW, you have a client here to see you. They're not on your schedule and they look like a doozy. Story 13. I took a job as a receptionist. Pay wasn't great and there were no benefits, but the interviewer stressed work-life balance as they have 3 receptionists. so it should be okay for one to leave early as needed. Well, it turned out that by leave early, she meant leave right at 5 o'clock rather than waiting for any stragglers to leave. I missed many of my daughter's cross-country meets, but was determined to make it to her league championship meet. We came back from lunch at 2 o'clock, so I asked if I could just be off the rest of the day instead to have time to change and travel to where the meet was. The office manager made me pull up Google Maps and calculate to the minute what time I need to leave the office to go directly to the meet, and made me work up to that minute. So much for work-life balance. They also demanded a hell of a lot of work considering the pay. I thought I'd just be answering phones and scheduling appointments, but anytime there was a lull, we were supposed to be running reports, poring over records for mistakes, etc., and there were rarely lulls. Usually the phone was ringing, I was trying to reach another staff who wasn't answering her phone, and I had two people in front of me with questions, so when things actually got quiet for a sec, I wanted to actually catch my breath. Nope, gotta go through these 400 postcards and make sure they're correct before we mail them. It was way too much for the pay, but the Google Maps incident was my breaking point. Story 14. I was told the oily stains on my work shirt were highly toxic dioxins. In my 20s, I went to work replacing the mung lines of a plastics plant. We were given yellow rain suits, rubber boots, and face shields and told to power wash the 3-foot diameter pipes, taking the tar-like substances and putting them in a special metal barrel for disposal. When we needed to get a new barrel, I had to go to the safety office to sign it out. The dude there freaked out when he saw the tiny black specks on my shirt. Needless to say, after his explanation of how very, very bad this was, I took the barrel over to my supervisor, took off my shirt, and put it in the barrel as per safety guys' instructions. I walked over to my car, kicked off my boots and jeans, and drove away in my garments. Story 15. One of my first ever jobs was at a pretty fun wings restaurant. We had a challenge where if you could eat 60 wings in 60 minutes, you got your name on the wall of fame. 3 guys came in, already pretty intoxicated from hitting the bars across the street, and all tried the challenge. They're drinking as they go, but one guy went way too hard on the alcohol and retched up 58 wings and beer and stomach acid on his friends and all over the table. And then they did too. We had to literally close the restaurant because there were 175 chicken wings and retch covering the middle of the room. I was a busboy, my boss wanted me to handle it. I said, screw that, I'm not doing that, and he got the dishwasher to do it for $50. Story 16. My old gig, my direct supervisor got jealous because his boss invited me to lunch my first month or two, and I had the audacity to accept the offer. From then on, he would gatekeep deadlines I was responsible for and only tell me about them at the last minute, like at 3 p.m., asking me how I was going with that thing that was due at 5 p.m., without having ever previously mentioned it to me. I managed to pull off a few miracles, but also missed some deadlines too. I made it a year into a 3-year contract. Then on my 1-year anniversary, I put a lunch meeting with him on his calendar, planning to tell him I was quitting. As we were walking out of his office, I couldn't stand it and just blurted out, look, there's something I want to talk to you about. And he cut me off and said, I don't think this is working out. I'm going to let you go. I laughed, hung a left, and walked to the HR department, told them what he had been doing for the past year with receipts, and told them he had just relieved me of my duties. I was told to go home and that things would be sorted out, and 3 days later, I got a termination agreement hand-delivered at my home with 2 years of severance. They had to pay me out because I had documented everything. He was fired 2 months later for cause, easiest $400,000 I ever made. Story 17. I was a Q&A tester for a video game. I submitted a critical bug for a piece of content made by a designer for an expansion to our MMO. That designer came over from across the building to yell at me saying my bug was invalid. I didn't argue. I didn't do anything when they closed the bug as invalid. I didn't complain to my boss. Some coworkers came to see if I was okay. A few weeks later, they were having a public reveal on a test server where people could try out the content for free for like 3 days. This designer's content was the first level of the expansion content, and because it was broken, players couldn't access anything. I swung by her desk and saw her with her head in her hands as the lead producer and senior producer was standing over her. About 2 months later, she was laid off. Our team had this weird tradition where if someone was fired or laid off, people who didn't like them would collect their name tags. It was sort of a trophy to say, I outlasted this person. Some people would also grab the name tags to protect them from someone else keeping it as a trophy. It started with our boss at his previous game studio, and he brought it to our company. It was a very weird and macabre tradition that largely existed because layoffs were frequent. I tried to avoid it as much as I could because I felt it was a little infantile, but I made sure that I collected her name tag when she was laid off. Story 18. Was working as a fixation worker, women's transitional living, helping women who were in emergency shelter get back on their feet, and had a client swing at me and threaten my life for responding to her substance use related crisis. Had an interview 2 days later, was waiting to hear back when I had another client verbally mistreat me after I called an ambulance for the stroke she was having. Heard that my references were contacted, had another client tell me she thought I had cancer because of all the weight I dropped in a short period of time. Finally was offered the job, went to work ready to submit my 2 weeks, and had a bird crap on my head as I was walking into my 12-hour overnight shift with my 2 weeks in my hand. That was a sign I needed that I was making the right choice and that I wasn't paid enough for the literal crap I had to deal with. Story 19. At my first job, working as a front counter/server at a local drive-in where I would take the orders at the till, then immediately make the orders myself and serve the customer, then go to the next customer. I was the only one scheduled the morning shift and worked 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. completely alone because my only supervisor decided to spend that whole morning in the office. I was completely alone, working 2 tills with heaps of customers coming in. Mind you, this was at a popular local drive-in during the summer. I was making milkshakes and ice creams as fast as I could, and one adult man had the audacity to yell, "Can we get some service here?" as I'm visibly running around covered in ice cream and talking to multiple customers at once. Like, sir, I'm only one person. I am 18 years old. Give me a friggin' second. It just makes me mad thinking about it. I should have gotten 100% of the tips that morning, but of course it's all shared equally by everyone, whether they worked or not. Story 20. The district manager visited the Blockbuster I worked at and asked us how many super expensive $20 a month rent unlimited video game subscriptions we'd sold. I was happy to ring people up and give them feedback and advice on movies to watch, but I'm not conning them into a bad deal. He breathed down my neck and basically was forcing me to ask every customer if they wanted to be in on it, so I just quit then and there. The same guy also took all of our clocks off the wall when he arrived so they wouldn't distract us. No way am I going to sit there and take that kind of condescension. This is an old story from the 2000s, of course, when I was young. And if you're enjoying the video too, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. I used to work with elementary students as a program administrator. I once had a dad scream at me for 45 minutes about how his child, 10 years old, got injured in a PE class, asked the teacher for help, and was, quote, ignored and denied medical attention. Went to the video footage of the gym that day. The girl got hit with a softball and dramatically collapsed. The teacher went over, talked to her, got her an ice pack, and wrote an incident report that the dad had signed. When I told him that and said, "It's concerning your daughter lied to you, making allegations about a teacher can lead to a very serious and real consequence, including charges where they could never pass a background check to work with children again." He scoffed and said, "My daughter doesn't lie, she just misremembers the truth sometimes." Yeah, I don't work with kids anymore because of parents. Story 22. There were multiple moments that made me realize I definitely wasn't getting paid enough, getting yelled at, insulted, and even reprimanded for asking why I had to make up hours as an exempt employee just because I went to a medical appointment. But the breaking point was when my boss, who was also an attorney, advised a client to hide money from the local tax department to avoid a lien. That's the kind of thing that can get us disbarred, and yet it was treated like nothing. The next day, I left a 3-page resignation letter on his desk and my coworkers' desks and walked out before he even got to the office. By the end of the summer, the rest of my coworkers followed and left the firm too. Story 23. They hired a PhD to lecture us even though we were top of the industry. The PhD told me in private he had no idea his position would be like that. The new hire boss made some email statements, poorly thought out decisions using the PhD's name for credit. When I confronted them, they complained about my work ethic, me who bent backwards to not cause delays, customers always very satisfied of my work. I asked them in what exactly my work ethic was flawed. Their game was to say, "Come on, you know what we mean, don't be silly." When asked to cite what was the conflict, I quit on the spot effective immediately. If I told my boss to eat crap, they would have fired me on the spot? Yeah, I quit on the spot when being disrespected this way. Story 24. I used to work at a swim instructor school for kiddos. I was 17-ish and a temporary manager had come to our location because our current manager had a family issue arise. I'd only been there for about a month, give or take. When I first started, I was told about these optional monthly meetings that happen on the first weekend of every month. Completely optional, but they mostly went over how things were going and they played around in the pool sometimes. Well, the temporary manager decided to make them mandatory, except the meeting was happening on my little sister's birthday party. I told him that I couldn't make it in the group chat as well as why, and he messaged me privately to tell me that my sister's party wasn't a good enough excuse and that if I didn't come, I'd be written up. So I texted him that I quit, didn't go back, didn't pass go, didn't collect $200, ended the conversation there and threw the team shirt away because absolutely no. Story 25. Dishwasher at an all-you-can-eat buffet, Mother's Day. The second dishwasher is a no-call, no-show. Instead of getting the minimal help of getting the carts with the clean plates and taking them up front, I'm left on an island. Whenever I took a cart up front, I would stop at the fountain machine to refill my cup with cold water. I wouldn't stand there and drink. The manager comes up and tells me I can't be stopping for water every time I come up front. No problems. Mind you, it's plates, bowls, cups, flatware, and all the pots and pans that I'm cleaning. Or I should say that I'm now not cleaning. It was glorious. Hundreds of dirty plates, bowls, cups just piling up. One of the bussers rushes in and tells me we are out of plates. Mission accomplished. I walked out past the register where my GF is working solo. Yes, this company was cheap as crap. And told her I'd be back to pick her up. As I walked out, I heard the sweet sound of the manager losing his crap. Story 26. This was decades ago, working at a Walmart during college. My mom had passed away somewhat unexpectedly, was sick, but we didn't know she was that sick, and I was kind of pressured to return to work sooner than I was ready. This was the store in the small town I grew up in, so a lot of customers knew my family. People think they're being nice when they approach you to tell you they're sorry for your loss, but doing this to someone while she's working is very cruel. I kept having to leave my register to go cry in the bathroom. Twice in that first couple of weeks back, my register was slightly off, less than $5 at the end of my shift. Despite having never been even a penny off in the prior 2+ years I'd worked there, I got written up for this. One of the older ladies had been off over $1,000 on the previous Black Friday, and I get written up for that? Screw that noise. Story 27. Private school, they let another teacher steal my professional learning materials and pass them off to the staff as his own. When I called the admin on the issue, they were silent. I wrote a 20+ page policy document for admin on how we could transition the staff to online teaching at the beginning of COVID, timelines, resources, training needed, rationale for everything. They ignored my email, said nothing to me, but 2 weeks later started, poorly, putting my plans into play. When I raised concerns about how they were handling staff, mental health support, and student success during COVID, they threatened to fire me 3 times in 2 weeks. I started looking for a job immediately and got out about a year later. Post-COVID, the school is on the verge of financial collapse because they've prioritized profits over education, and the quality of the people they're hiring and the students they've accepted has slipped year over year. I'm making 50% more working in the public system. Story 28. It's not an insane story, but I applied for an estate agent job with the company Purple Bricks, who at the time went into liquidation, but were bought by another company for £1 to clear debts and stay afloat. I had a total of 3 days training, roughly 4 hours a day for the first 2 days and then 30 minutes on the third, purely PowerPoint presentations. The day after this, the guy, my boss, pretty much said, "Okay, good luck," handed me about 100 property keys and gave me a phone, to which my first responsibility was to apologize to all their clients for being kept in the dark due to high staff turnover. Needless to say, I told my boss I wasn't prepared enough for what I threw myself into and quit the next day. Story 29. Worked as an accountant for a financial firm. Every accounting software on the planet rounds dollar amounts up or down depending on the situation. Boss wanted to see exact amounts, but with each number rounded to the nearest dollar. For example, $100,001.34 shown as $100,001 instead of $100,000. Of course, this leads to certain situations where it looks weird. For example, $1.49 plus $1.49 equals $2.98 rounds to $1 plus $1 equals $3. Got yelled at in front of the entire team and had to spend the night in the office forcing software to make the rounding look normal. Of course, everything in accounting flows from one form to another, and so messing with any number in one place can mess up sums in another place. And it was impossible to simply force the number that was needed. Had to do stuff like change $1.49 to 1.4875 cents to try and force it all to work. Was yelled at around 5 p.m. and had to work continuously until the next day at 5 p.m. to get the rounding mostly working. For a company with assets over $1 billion. In the end, none of it matters because it ultimately gets shortened from $100,001 to $100,000 for investors, auditors, and regulators anyway. It was all for management eyes and egos. Story 30. Worked as a contractor for the federal government issuing COVID-19 payments, pandemic isolation, helping on MyGov, Centerlink, and Medicare payments during lockdown, also getting vax stats on the QR code app. A guy asked for help with updating the QR code to reflect vax status. I clearly explained what to click on the different pages. He asks if I can just do it for him, if he gives me his username and password. I explain no because it has 2-factor authentication and I wouldn't receive the number. He says, "Well, I'll just read it to you over the phone." I say, "No, if I were to log into your account as you, it would be considered identity theft. The federal tech people in Canberra would recognize my IP logging into a MyGov account, not mine, and my manager would be notified. I'd lose my job in approximately 20 minutes after doing what you wanted. He replies, "So, can't you just help me?" Story 31. Worked in a factory as a student. The person next to me placed the lids on shampoo bottles as they came down the conveyor. I had a wooden bat and my job was to whack the lids on tight. Every time I hit one, a squirt of shampoo would hit me in the eye. 12-hour shift. The radio was playing, but at that annoying level where you could hear it but not loud enough to hear what was being said or identify songs. Managers walked in and said to improve productivity, they were removing our chairs and we'd be standing for the rest of the shift. At this point, I thought, nope, screw this, but I couldn't get out of the building mid-shift without a manager swiping me out. Felt like too much hassle, so I went to the toilets and jumped out through the first floor window. Best decision ever? Zero regrets. Funny thing, a few years later, I randomly met someone who was working there. I said I'd done a shift there and hated it. They replied, no crap, everyone hates it. They have grills on the bathroom windows because, rumor has it, someone once jumped out. Story 32. Worked at a fast casual restaurant as a kitchen manager, open line restaurant, and during busy times I would jump on the line with my staff to push food and service. The company was trying to squeeze profits and the GM started cutting my prep cook staff early, leaving me with more work. I was salaried. It was happening every day for months, longer hours, no extra pay. And one day I'm on the line during a rush helping push service. The owner of the company is sitting with his son at a table right in front of me. The son is 18, just graduated from high school. The owner handed his son the keys to a Jimmy John's franchise as a graduation gift. The kid had never worked a day in his life, and it hit me that all these extra hours and penny pinching and labor cost BS for the last year just went into the hands of this pimple-faced schmuck who has probably never bagged his own lunch. This was 5 years ago. I quit the next day, told myself I would never work a job where my wage was not directly tied to my effort and performance, got into sales. Made $150,000 last year in LCOL, low cost of living area. Coming up on 1 year in the house I bought with my fiance, getting married in June. Story 33. There was a conference that I had spent months planning. I booked the food, the vendors, the location, the attendees, all of it. My boss and one of my coworkers were tangentially involved because they had to be there in person on the day, but I handled everything else. The venue I booked was one we owned, so it was no big deal. So like 2 days before the conference, my boss CCs me on an email to my coworker saying that he was changing the location and had booked another one we owned. It irritated me because he made that change without consulting me at all, but whatever, right? He's my boss, and I knew he was prone to that sort of last-minute crap, so no big deal. I pop a quick email to all of the attendees about the location change and CC him on there. He calls me, screaming because how dare I tell people the location change? Didn't I know he wanted them to meet him at the original location, and then everyone would walk over together? How could I not be psychic like that, right? Dude literally screamed at me until I cried. He was so loud that my coworker, who sits 10 feet away and luckily was a very good friend, could clearly hear him over the phone. I ended up having to send an apology email to all of the attendees saying it was my fault. When he got back in the office, he then came and yelled at me again, in person, about it, and then spent the next couple of weeks making snide remarks about me being dumb. This boss was a total piece of crap in general. He used to give me unwanted messages and say it was okay because he's gay and therefore not attracted to me. He would throw parties where he gave substances and alcohol to minors. He once drove intoxicated and crashed his car after a work party and therefore decided that rather than him being an alcoholic, the problem was clearly that there was alcohol at work parties, so we weren't allowed to drink anymore. And also, he eventually got fired from the job because he was a creep who creeped on the young men who worked for us, which I didn't know until after I left and his first victim had already come forward. For some reason, though, the crap with the conference is what made me choose to start looking for somewhere else to work. Story 34. What happened? Chronos happened. I was placed through a temp agency, and being a temp, I was being paid absolutely crap. I was to verify overtime, but no department would actually make sure the entries in Chronos were right, so I had to make sure, with some help, but not a lot, that every single person's time card was accurate. A lot of times, people would be scheduled for 72 hours, an entire shift not entered, and it not spotted because they had 8 overtime hours, giving the illusion of 80 with no overtime. There was no clock in or clock out. We're talking roughly 2,000 time cards, so it's a big task. We just got a new office manager from hell that didn't even want me checking the cards with 80 hours because, in her opinion, they're right, there's nothing to check. But we had to be compliant for 3 unions and 2 collective bargaining agreements. Every pay period we asked for extra time because of how few people there were to check and how many creative and inventive ways the departments could screw up a time card. Plus, the new manager said, don't quickly fix the mistakes, send an email about the mistakes to the departments and wait for them to fix the mistakes. Oh, and don't worry about the unions. So I'm doing all of this for less pay than Costco offers, and then the Chronos ransomware happened. We had to do everything on old-fashioned spreadsheets and half the time 3 days because accounting needed to review rather than let Kronos do it for them. For 2,000 people who can't remember to enter all normal shifts into a computer. I was stretched to the point that I was really considering quitting. Ransomware pushed me over the edge, quit without notice. Story 35. I was working at a Target at guest service. I had been at Target for, let's say, almost 5 years and was about done with that job anyway. This was back when prepaid phones were popular. A girl who barely looked old enough to drive brought an AT&T phone and prepaid card to guest service to buy. We sold both cards to load minutes on cell phones, and we also sold cards for payphones. Once they were activated, they couldn't be returned and they were not interchangeable. I used to work electronics and knew this. I called back to electronics to verify if she had the right card, and he said yes, so I sold her the phone and the card. I opened the next morning, and around 10 or so, I took my break. I come back to the girl pointing at me, screaming, "That's him, that's the guy." I'm looking around like, what the heck is going on? Apparently, she did buy the wrong card, and when she came to return it and they told her she couldn't, she got her parents. Her dad was completely hammered at 10:30 in the morning and acting like a belligerent schmuck. He starts telling me that I stole $50 from his daughter and I was paying her back, as if somehow was doing this for kicks just to mess with her or making money off of a scam. The mother accused me of being a smoker. Now, if they would have been nice about the whole thing, the store manager would have eaten the $50 and given them a store credit to buy the right card, but since they were acting the way they were, he had security escort them out. I was not about to get terminated over a $50 phone card and had my fill of dealing with the public and put my notice in the next day. I think I worked 2 more days and never went back. I still have nightmares when I walk in that place hearing walkie-talkies and calling for backup to the registers. Story 36. A lady was screaming nonsense at me from her car as I was trying to leave work, so I called my manager to ask what to do since she wouldn't leave me alone. But the owners live on site and are geriatric, so I was worried about leaving her there. She said, "Just leave." And I was like, "Yep, great, because $17 an hour isn't enough to be helping someone have a mental break thinking she owns my work's property." Unfortunately, she physically blocked me in, illegal, so I started filming her for safety. She then tried to run me over when she heard me call 911, then fled in her vehicle when the sheriff showed up. They had to spike strip her on the highway. She's been in jail since this happened in February and is only now finally getting moved to a psychiatric inpatient hospital. She keeps pleading not guilty, but we had video evidence. Attempting to hit someone with your car is assault with a weapon. To be clear, I wish she'd gone straight to getting the mental health help she needed. I had to call 911 because she wasn't letting me leave the property to get to safety. I know cops aren't good with mental health breaks, and I'm sure jail has been awful. Not worth $17, and I had to sit around waiting for the sheriff to come and get the police report and video and audio and everything, which I think I did actually clock in or out depending on the context of the waiting period, lol. Story 37. I worked front desk at a resort during COVID, and it took a few months before the higher-ups finally decided to start putting everyone on leave. Before that, we had to go through several months of constant calls from people who, understandably, couldn't make their reservation due to travel restrictions. However, because the higher-ups were freaking sociopaths, they expected us to tell anyone who was calling to cancel, regardless of their reasoning, that they were not allowed to get a refund and that their only option was to reschedule, which the unspoken rule was that they could only reschedule one time. After that, they were screwed out of their money if the dates didn't work. The only thing that kept me from quitting after a week of that BS was our front desk manager finally breaking down and saying, "Screw that," and telling us to give everyone who called a refund without question. And I am still thankful that manager had half a brain because we did not get paid enough to get screamed at over the phone all day on top of already getting screamed at by people checking in and actively staying there. No thanks. Story 38. Manager at Chipotle paid new hires more than other staff and me who had been there 2 years. I stayed though. Then the manager thought people were faking sick to call out of work. I never called out sick, got sick, called out of one shift. She dropped me from 39 hours a week to 8. When I found out, I walked across the street and to another restaurant, interviewed, got hired the next day. Walked in to work that day and quit. No 2-week notice? My manager asked. Didn't seem like you needed me all that much. Good luck with the shift today, I replied. Best part, a few weeks later, my new boss invited me out for a few beers after shift. We walked over to the Chipotle I had worked at and drank there. My ex-manager was spiked as we ordered the drinks. Good times. Story 39. Got blamed for a huge screw-up that happened. My immediate supervisor CC'd God and everyone. So I took a screenshot of the timestamp from when it was recorded, reminding them I didn't work for them at the time this took place. Also included a screenshot of my boss being the user who was on the timestamp, plus another screenshot of my employee profile showing my start date. I had already put in my 2 weeks a few days earlier, but it will now be effective immediately. I took my plant, left my keys on the desk, and got in my car. My hourly rate doubled when I moved. Absolutely not ever putting up with that. Guess who stopped waking up at 4 a.m. every day? And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.